Well, welcome to Fuquay-Varina United Methodist Church. We're so glad you're here for worship. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Owen, one of the pastors here. We'd love to get to know you. And so if this is your first time with us or your first time in a long time, feel free to just text the word hello to the number that's right here at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to get back in touch with you today, see if we can answer any of your questions, help you engage your faith or the community around you. No matter how you found your way here with us today, we're so glad you did. But wherever you are, Facebook or YouTube, feel free to like or subscribe right there. We've got regular content that comes out on a pretty regular basis, and we would love for you to be able to see that. Also, if you see or hear anything today that you think is worthwhile, we'd love for you to share that with someone that you know, love, and trust. If you have any questions or want to follow up on anything that you stumble upon today, everything should be available right on our website, fvumc.org. You can navigate over there, and everything that we mentioned today should be easy to find on that website. While you're there, in the top right-hand corner, you will notice a little button that says Give, and we would love for you to support the mission and the ministry of our church that makes moments just like this possible, as well as helps us continue to serve in and around the greater Fuquay area as we serve out in our community, trying to make a difference. And so we're so thankful for your partnership, and really today we're thankful for your presence. We're glad you're here. We hope that you find something in these next few moments meaningful, and we pray that they will bless your life. Let's worship together.
Places. Let our dry bones hear and respond to your word for us, that we should live.
I love this story that we call the Road to Emmaus. It's the story of two followers of Jesus that we find walking down a road to a town called Emmaus just outside of Jerusalem by about 7 miles or so, depending on how you calculate it. And they're headed there after the death of Jesus, disappointed. In fact, they're headed there after the news of the resurrection has already started to spread among some of Jesus' followers. But they find this fantasy too good to believe, too good to trust. And so they're mourning, they're grieving as they walk along this road. And as they walk along this road, they encounter a stranger who turns out to be Jesus. They don't know it for a while. Later, when Jesus is revealed to them, or when their eyes are finally open, or maybe when Jesus reveals himself to them, there's kind of a turning point. And then they rush back home to share that good news with the other disciples. The news that the worst thing is never the last thing. And they become some of the earliest followers of Jesus to celebrate the fullness of the gospel, that the worst thing is never the last thing for us and for the world. Now, what I love about this story is that every time I come back to it, right, I can find myself somewhere else in it, in a new place, in a new way. And I think probably we could spend a whole lifetime coming back to the story over and over again. And every time we do, afresh and anew, we're going to find ourselves existing in the story somewhere. If you were with us on Easter, we talked about what it looks like when we show up to life expecting death. And I think what we see in these two followers of Jesus is that's exactly what they're doing. In fact, as they talk to this stranger on the road, they use the term had hoped. Hope is in the past tense. They say, we had hoped that Jesus would be the one to redeem us, redeem the world. But instead, he's dead. They're showing up to life, talking to the risen Christ himself, expecting death. They're carrying with them the exact same thing that I think we carry into life, what you might call the disbelief of the disappointed. Even though they had been confronted by the reality of the resurrection, they'd been confronted by this incredible news, they couldn't allow themselves to believe it. They didn't have the capacity to imagine that the story could have ended in any way other than with the death of Jesus, not just because they saw it happen, but because this is how the story always seems to end up. I think we probably know exactly what this is like. Maybe you can think of a time or a way, but I can think of several in my own life where you show up, right? And all of a sudden you get your hopes up. And you get your hopes up and you expect great things are going to happen, that the brokenness that you're experiencing, the disappointment you're experiencing is not going to be the reality. And then it turns out it is, again, period. And you don't just go back to the regular old kind of place that you entered into that hope, but you actually end up more disappointed, like lower than you were to begin with. It's almost as if you hadn't gotten your hopes up. You would have been in a better place. You'd have been better off than if you had. Right? And so when that happens in our lives over and over again, when it happens enough, we learn to kind of protect ourselves, to hedge our bets, if you will, not to get our hopes up. We protect ourselves by not getting our hopes up, by not expecting that the story can end in any sort of different way, because it's easier for us. It doesn't hurt as much for us. When we ourselves experience the disbelief of the disappointed, we eventually learn not to expect more, not to hope for more, not to pray for more. But we watch as this story progresses that the disbelief of the disappointed turns into a different posture, a different mindset, a different attitude, as they begin to grapple with the promise of what's possible. On the other side of their encounter with Jesus, they now believe that something more is possible. And not just something more, but something more than the more they thought might be possible before. They now believe that the brokenness that we experience, the powers of this world, they are real powers, they are true powers, but that the powers of this world, the powers of brokenness that we experience, those powers are no longer the final arbiters of our reality. In that moment, they come to recognize that God is not absent or feckless or cruel, but that God is present and powerful and deeply in love with God's creation. And there in the middle of this transition from the disbelief of the disappointed to the promise of what's possible lie two acts of hospitality. The first act of hospitality is an offer, an invitation for this stranger that's been walking with them to come in so that they can provide, they can offer shelter, they can give sustenance to him. The second act of hospitality is their willingness to receive, as this stranger picks up bread to serve them and breaks it. And it's in this full act of hospitality, offering and receiving hospitality, that they have an encounter with the living God. It's this story and so many other examples in Scripture that it would be hard to pick just two or three, that we see the connection between our love of God and the love of our neighbor, between our desire to grow closer and have an encounter with God and the necessity to have an encounter with our neighbor. There is a desert father, right, a hermit monk, if you will, that in the 500s moved out into the wilderness outside of Gaza to get as close to God as he could. And when he did, he rested a teaching for his disciples on this very concept, this idea that the love of God and the love of neighbor are so tightly ingrained that they can't be separated. His name is Dorotheus of Gaza, and I want to share with you a little bit about the example that he offered to his disciples while he was there, the teachings that he offered to them. He says, suppose we were to take a compass, not a compass like north, south, east, and west, but a compass that you used in elementary school to draw a perfect circle. He says, suppose that we were to take a compass and insert the point right in the middle. And then to draw the outline of a circle around it. The center point is the same distance from any point on the circumference. He continues, now let us suppose that this circle is the world and that God is in the center. And the straight lines that we draw from the circumference into the center are the lives of human beings. Now, this is an interesting analogy that he's setting up, right? He's talking about what it looks like in our lives to grow from the outside of the circle to the inside of the circle, from a distance away from God to a distance up close to God. But what he notes as he continues is that all of our lives, these lines that we're drawing closer and closer to God, as we follow along the trajectory of those lines, we ourselves become closer not just to God, but we become closer and closer and closer to each other. Dorotheus continues, but at the same time, the closer they are to God, the closer they become to one another, and the closer they are to one another, the closer they become to God. There is no growing closer to God without growing closer to one another. There is no growing in our love of God without growing in our love of one another. The hospitality that we see extended in this story is just that. It's the outward and visible expression of a love for a neighbor that they did not even know. That extension of care for a neighbor is just a rhythm that was already a part of their lives because that's what Jesus spent a lot of time teaching his followers to do. I imagine that it was almost reflex or habit as this man turned to walk his way down the road to invite him to come in as the sun was setting. This is what it looks like to live a Jesus sort of life, is to offer this hospitality. And I believe that when we do, we encounter God and our lives are changed just like theirs. Over the course of these 3 weeks, we're attempting to offer some really concrete ways that we can help you show up expecting life, that we can help us engage our faith, that we can help each other double down on our discipleship, that we can help each other live a Jesus type of life. Last week, if you were with us, we talked about carving out a time for prayer. Pastor Hope taught us that prayer is the art of listening to God, and she encouraged us to carve out 1 unit of time this week to practice listening to God. And she gave us a practice to use if we didn't have one of our own called the Examine. I would encourage you to go back and take a listen to it. This week, I want to talk about the habit of hospitality, because we cannot grow closer to God without growing closer to one another. One cannot exist without the other. Now, normally what I would teach you to do in this habit of hospitality, I would challenge you to go and spend 1 unit of time this week eating with somebody else that's maybe even outside your closest circle of people, outside of your family. I would encourage you to invite them over. Invite them over to your house. Invite them over to your table in the break room or in the cafeteria. Invite them out from the office to go and grab a bite to eat in between meetings or whatever it might be, and to use that time to serve and to nurture and to care for them in y'all's relationship with each other. I've said before, someone once said, I don't know who to attribute it to, that you don't really know a person until you've shared with them a pound of salt. And we don't eat salt by the pound, we eat it by the pinch. And so that's a lot of meals that it takes for us to really get to know one another. And as we grow closer to one another, we're growing closer to God. Now, I know that that challenge would be super hard right now because it feels like we've all been so isolated from one another. The irony is not lost on me, however, that we get this example of the circle and the radii and the point in the center from a person who was a monk, a hermit monk in the desert. Like literally, the whole purpose of moving from the city out into the wilderness was to get away from people. The idea was that he could go live a life of solitude, free from the trappings and the distractions of life, so that he could focus most fully on becoming like Jesus, on growing in his relationship, his love of God. And Dorotheus actually said that there are 2 things, and both are a choice, solitude and isolation, but those 2 things are different things. Solitude, like I said, is stepping away from the distractions and the trappings of life in order that we might focus on our relationship with God. And that's a choice that one can make. I think it's a choice that we talked about last week, to step away in prayer. We see Jesus doing that all the time. Isolation is also a choice, but isolation removes us from our neighbor. And what happens when we move further and further away from our neighbor? We're also moving further and further away from God at the center. Solitude and isolation are two different things. They're opposite things. And he invites us to consider solitude, but not solitude at the expense of our neighbor, which would be called isolation. Even in solitude, we're called to serve and to care for one another. Both are a choice. I would encourage you to choose solitude, the season of solitude, over the feelings of isolation that we have. And so even in solitude, we can find ways to be hospitable, to extend care to those who are around us. And so I would offer you two things to consider with that in mind. The first is this. I would encourage you not first to offer hospitality, but to receive it. And I want to encourage you to offer hospitality. It is like the heartbeat that I have. And yet I want to approach that a little bit differently. I want to invite you to receive hospitality, which sometimes for us can be much harder. Again, hospitality that we see in this story is hospitality offered and hospitality received. I want to encourage you to think about what it looks like to receive hospitality from someone. When someone offers you something, even if you don't feel like you want it or need it, what would it look like for you to say yes to that offer? What would it look like for you to ask for help or for advice from someone in your life? What would it look like this week for you to be open to doing something with someone else, even if it means the thing that you're doing is not done as well, because we all know things are better if we just do them ourselves? I believe that mentality moves us further away from one another, further away from the center of the circle and back towards the edges. What would it look like for you to receive hospitality this week? If you're nervous about offering it to someone, pay attention. Pay attention. Someone will offer you the opportunity to take advantage of their hospitality this week. And I would encourage you to take advantage of it when that opportunity arises. The second thing that I would encourage you to do is more of an offer. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I believe that right now, as people of the church, not just this church, but all churches, the church in the world, our job is to help our communities, help our friends and our neighbors begin to build bridges back to life together. We all ran across those bridges a year ago, and where we've lived on that bridge has been different for each of us, I'm sure, over the last few months. Wherever you've lived, it's now our responsibility to help people build bridges back. I want you to think about this scenario. I think I may have mentioned it before. There are people that you thought of as your friends, and they thought of you as their friend. And these are people that for a whole year, you maybe haven't thought to reach out to and to check on, or maybe they haven't thought to reach out and to check on you. If you were in the same place at the same time, just like you always were, you would have been caring for each other and looking after each other and checking in on each other. But we weren't. And so we didn't. Can you imagine how awkward it's going to be when we see each other again for the first time in a long time? I one time heard someone define hospitality as being awkward so that the other person doesn't have to be. One day, it is a life goal that one day that will be emblazoned on a t-shirt for greeters in some church somewhere. Be awkward so that they don't have to be. I want to encourage you this week, build a bridge back. Be awkward so that they don't have to be. Take the initiative to invite. Whether it's inviting someone to come and sit and worship with you, or whether it's an invitation to meet out at a park, let your kids see each other for the first time in a long time, whether it's just a phone call to say, I recognize that it's been a year since I checked up on you, and I lament the fact that I lost that opportunity, but I'd like to make it right now. What would it look like for you this week to help build a bridge back so that someone can easily cross it back into a life of community together? As I send you off into your week to practice these two new habits of hospitality, I'd like to send you with the words of Dorotheus himself at the end of his teaching on this circle. He says, "May we be worthy by God to hear what is best for us, and may we do it. Because in the measure that we take heed and do what we hear, God will enlighten us concerning God's will." May this be true for you this week as you engage your faith.
As we sing this song together, we are reminded of our God who calls us home over and over again. And somehow in our lives, He works all things for good.
Sometimes on this journey, I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength.
And my story isn't over, my story's just begun. Failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Yeah, failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does.
Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check the shame at the door. It's didn't welcome anymore. You're in the Father's house, yes. Oh, because you hold. Oh, He does.
Arrival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. You never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart.
And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. The failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house.
Oh, yes. Oh, the Father's house. Oh, come home. Oh, come home. Prodigals come home. The helpless find home. God is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide, the dead comes to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Here we go.
Miracles take place, the cynical find faith, and love's breaking through when the Father's in the room.
Oh, yes.
Jericho walls are breaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room.
Sing that.
Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house.
Well, again, it's been great to be with you for worship here at Fuquay-Varina United Methodist Church. We're so glad that you chose to worship with us in this moment. If you heard something meaningful today that you think would benefit someone else, feel free to share it with them. If there's something that we can follow up on that would be helpful for you, you can just text the word hello to the number that's right here at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to get back in touch with you today, see how we can answer your questions, help you engage your faith and the community around you. Again, we're here all the time, so don't hesitate to reach out if there's something we can do. Anything you've heard us say or mention today can be found on our website, fvumc.org, so you can navigate over that way on the interwebs and go find what you're looking for there. But if there's any way that we can be a resource for you or an assistance as you journey through your life of faith together, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's been great to be together, and we'll see you next time.